Good afternoon, everybody. It's Saturday midday or a little after, and sorry to be so late in getting this to you, but this is the teaching lesson ahead of our all-together in-person gathering on March 7th at 10 a.m. First Sunday of the month, we'll be all together this coming Sunday, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. But this is a teaching series that we're doing and presented by Grace Church. And this is our common identity and purpose statement that because of the Bible's grand story of God's creation to new creation, focused on Jesus, welcomes us to make it our story as well. We are a family of families who worship and follow Jesus as Lord by learning to think and live wisely together by His Spirit so that we can seek the welfare of our city and world in the way of Christ and His apostles. Hope you take time to think and reflect about that, what that means, who we are and what we do, and how we've gotten to where we are. It's very germane to what we're talking about in 1 Peter as we end that series this week and next. Again, sorry about the lateness of my uh, teaching this week. Yesterday, which is a day I normally produce this, was a day full of meetings with international leaders in the Build Global Network. And this is a meeting, what they call the Global Resource Team. And just really enjoyed it. We're meeting monthly, every first Friday of the month. We spend upwards of 4 hours together online. Guys here from Ukraine, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Central Africa, myself here, Iowa, Albania, Kosovo, France, Holland, Nepal, Mongolia, you see there. Wonderful conversations, thinking through together the basic ideas, the core ideas of the way of Christ and the apostles, and what it means for our churches and church networks, as well as especially being equipped to train other leaders and to be able to develop in these ideas together. So when you see these build prayer updates in Grace Notes each week, these are the guys that you're praying about firsthand, and some of them whom I'm working with firsthand. So I really appreciate your prayers for them. I enjoy the fruit of it in these times, and also in getting to work directly with some of them on the ground there. And we'll talk more about this idea of being part of a global network here at the end of Peter's letter coming up. But again, we will be meeting at 10 a.m. this Sunday. The Zoom at Noom Simple Church will meet on with us online at the same time, so we will not have two separate in-person and online meetings. We like to try to bring everybody together that we can, at least on that one Sunday where we all see and hear each other, and we're getting to use the technology well to do that. So please take note, if you're normally there at Zoom on noon, you're going to need to use the same link to join with us at 10 a.m. so that we can all be together. And we'll continue to meet as we have been. We're pretty much in this pattern through the beginning of April, and we'll see as the warm weather comes, especially as the Easter holiday passes, where we go from there. Vaccinations are picking up, and that will start influencing some of the things that we need to do, and some of the cautiousness that we've had. But it's still the wisest and loving thing to do together. So we do continue to social distance and wear masks when we're in the building together. And if the weather allows and there's time to be outside afterwards and to spend time with one another, talking there. Hopefully, and again, as things go along, we'll introduce a time of fellowship and coffee together afterwards so that, especially with the warm weather coming, we can do that outside and just have that time together. It's very precious to be able together in physical presence, proximity to one another. Um, just a reminder too that we're continuing to follow together the one story that leads to Jesus Bible reading plan that has been founded on the Bible Project, integrates their videos and a reading through the Old and New Testament with a psalm each day. So some of you are following that on the YouTube or the YouVersion, the Bible.com app. Um, but we are also emailing the exact same plan as if all of us had started on January 1st in an email that goes out early Monday morning. So it's there for those of you who get up early. I think it's going out at 4 or 5 in the morning on Monday, and that email will help guide you through the week ahead, starting that Monday. So you'll have the Old Testament reading, and we're in Joshua now, and starting to move through the post Pentateuch books. A psalm reading for that day, and then if there is a video according to the reading plan in their app or online, we've included that in that email, and it's clickable. So you'll just click on it; it'll take you right to that YouTube video. So make sure when you see that Monday email, if you want to use that to guide you through the week, make sure you keep that email handy, and you can go back to it through until the Sunday or Monday of the following week, and it'll guide you through the week. So we're just sending out once a week, but that's meant to get all of us on the same spot or working through the same days. So it assumes everybody started on January 1st. That's where we would be if we were all tracking together. So some of you are on track, and some of you may want to catch up with us from where we are. But I'm hoping that will help you to do that, and we should be able to roll those out through the remainder of the year now that we have the template and the system set up. And as usual, we will pray on Wednesday night at 7 on Zoom. That's going to be a regular feature, even post-COVID times. That's a wonderful efficiency now to be able to connect in that way and to pray together. And we break up into small groups of 4 or 5, and we're able to spend some time in that hour. It's strictly to an hour, 7 to 8. So plan that in your week, and pull your tablet out, your phone out, sit in front of your computer, and just enjoy getting to see each other and catching up through the week. This month now, we're in March. We're praying for the Knorr family, and we'll be probably hearing from them and seeing them even in the year to come. They're in the process of moving from the years of service that they've had in Japan and to the churches there, and particularly in these last years to Chinese immigrants in Japan, to retirement in upstate New York. And that may actually be pretty well complete. Not sure about the transition, but we'll try to get an update from them, and Carl and Liz may be able to provide a little more about that tomorrow. But they're moving into retirement, so continue to pray for that time for their kids in a variety of places in the world as well. But we celebrate with them many, many years of service to the Lord in the field in Japan, and we'll continue to keep you updated on them. But let's be in prayer for them over the month of March. Thursday, we'll have our continuing of our video study. We're in the Luke Acts series. We'll be looking at Acts chapter 8 to 12. So be reading Acts chapter 8 to 12 between now and Thursday. Tuesday, you'll get the email in the evening, and the study guide and video transcript will be there, as well as any other notes, and that you can begin to prepare for that discussion. These are really, really important tools we're developing week in and week out. That this is not a one-time thing. These will be part of our life and life development path, alongside things like First Principles and Life to the Nth. We're developing the use of a set of tools with these videos that will be crucial to those who are joining our church family in the years to come and want to get oriented and on the same page with all of us as a family. So I appreciate all the energy that you all are doing. That it is going to contribute to things that have a long-lasting impact. So I appreciate that. I've titled this teaching today, "The Gift That Keeps Us Going." We're at the very, very last few verses of 1 Peter in chapter 5, 12 to 14. And so this video is intent to give you an orientation to these particular passage, introduce some ideas to you, and provoke some thought, so that when we come together tomorrow, it will be a time of answering these questions, of sharing your thoughts. Again, when we come together as a community, it's a time for everyone to make a contribution. And I say that particularly for you men who are heads of households, who are the leaders among us. Come representing your household, ready to make a contribution and share the thoughts that may be representative in your household. Having talked with your family and your wife, your children about these things. And if you're the only one in your household, the older saints among us and unmarried, you represent those thoughts too, and we value your thoughts in that light too. I'll skip ahead on some of the sides that are typically in this set, and they're there for you to continue to go back and to review. But again, we're in this last section of Peter, and we've been following this as the narrative pattern, or the literary design and the structure of the letter, and how Peter's organized his thoughts towards his intention. And really starts to get specific about that in this passage. But we're looking at this closing passage now, really just from 12 to 14. I divided it up a little differently than they did, included 10 to 11 last week. But this end greeting, but a lot is being said here in just these couple of, these three verses. So we'll take a look at it here. And just, by way of reminder, looking at the New Testament as a whole and how these letters of the apostles function within it. Again, the New Testament tells a story. It is not a loose, random collection of books that were put together to help give us inspirational thoughts or to encourage us as believers. It's meant to lay out a plan and to give us an example of the story that we are a continuation of. And it's the beginning of our act in the story. If you think about God's age that began with the age of time that we're in now, that began with Jesus' resurrection and ascension and looking forward to his return. We live in that time. And these writings are historical documents, but have a theological meaning and significance for us that orients us to how we need to live given the time where we are between Jesus' resurrection and his return. And so the New Testament as a whole is designed to draw us into the story of God's plan to rescue the world from chaos and idolatry and to launch his new transformative creation. And that substantively began with Jesus and his resurrection, continues on generation after generation to us and through us to the generations to come until Jesus returns. We need to understand this plan. This plan is what guides and orients who we are and what we do today. We're not merely muddling along until Jesus comes back, hoping, for that to come sooner rather than later. We are engaged actively in a plan that's unfolding, and we need to understand that plan, get oriented to it, and obey the Lord in following it in whatever way that means. And so that's what we're about together. And Peter's making a contribution to that, and as we'll do everything that we do and teach. So we were looking at the encouragement of last week, and there's a good bridge here that, Peter was emphasizing that, what God has done. He's summarizing his thoughts at this point in the letter that, God has done all of this out of his kindness. God is not a spiteful, grumpy, frustrated older gentleman in the sky. We have terribly wrong thoughts culturally about who God is and what he's doing. He's out of love and kindness who loves to share, who loves to empower others and loves to draw others like us into his plans and his purpose. And but he does that in such a way that saves as many as possible. So it is a matter of God wooing like a courtier trying to draw others into the relationship with him and acting in that behalf. But it means there are those who are opposed, and there's a world that's opposed to him, and it sets up this need to be encouraged that we will be restored, supported, and we'll be put on a firm foundation. We will be put in a way that all that we're doing and all that is perhaps doubtful and questionable sometimes by the world around us and what happens in it will be made sure when we understand Jesus and the fullness of his plans in his revelation and his return. finally. So that's where Peter was ending the letter, as we looked at last week. All power to him forever. It's all begins and ends with Jesus and is wrapped up with him, and that's an encouragement and a signpost for us, a directional marker for us to keep going and moving ahead as well in our day and time until he returns, and to do our part in passing that on to the next generation. So I said in summary of last week's ideas, and by the way, I'll be gathering all of these summary thoughts as we close up and sort of wrap up our thinking about First Peter next week. So you'll get all of these put in one page or one document in the week to come to see the summary of all these things. And I hope you've been doing this alongside myself so that you're thinking them through and putting them in your own words. It's been my encouragement to you week in and week out. But I said this about last week's passage, bridging to today. A key part of our fruitfulness and mission with Jesus, even amidst opposition, is to know and recognize a true enemy behind suffering and persecution, yet living in hope and joy with confidence and perseverance now in God's unmerited favor, His grace, in other words, which will one day also transform all that is wrong in us and around us. That same grace is what all who are opposed to the good news of Jesus really need, just as we once did and still do. God's grace from beginning and past, present, and future is what continues to sustain us, as well as saving others. And Peter highlights that today. Let me just skip forward. We talk about some of these other things tomorrow, but I wanted to, again, each passage as we come to it, what's Peter talking about? The author in this case, what's he saying about this? Why is Peter saying it? Those are some of the basic questions you can ask yourself and begin to ask your answer and formulate in answers to in your own mind as you look at these. So what we're looking at today and tomorrow, I should say. I've written and sent this short letter, Peter says, to you with the help of Silas, whom I commend to you as a faithful brother. My purpose in writing is to encourage you and assure you that what you're experiencing is truly part of God's grace for you. Stand firm in this grace. Your sister church here in Babylon sends you greetings. So does my son Mark. Greet each other with a kiss of love. Peace be with all of you who are in Christ. And with that, we end Peter's first letter. Again, a letter that was meant to circulate amongst a number of churches, and we'll see that referred to here in a short time. But here's how he closes off the letter, and some pretty explicit statements here about what he's intended to do, summarizing in his own words what he intends to do with this letter, what his purpose has been. So it's helpful if you're asking these questions that we've asked of every passage. So looking at this passage, how would you summarize it in your own words? What would you say Peter is writing about, and what he says about that, and why is he writing it? In just a few statements, what would you share about that based on what you read and based on what you understand about the letter so far? We've worked carefully through this to try to build and connect all of these ideas together. It's one letter with one intention and one purpose, and every little part that we've looked at is contributing to that whole. The question arises here just after initial reading, at this point in the letter, right here at the end, once again, we're confronted with this question that we need to really have clarity on. How can suffering and the difficulties of our new life in Christ truly be a part of God's grace to us? How is it? He says it's truly God's grace to you. My purpose in writing is to encourage you and assure you that what you are experiencing, and we get a sense of that from looking at the whole letter and the things that Peter has addressed, that what you are experiencing is truly a part of God's grace for you. Stand firm in this grace. That's a huge statement and has huge implications. And so it's really good for us to stop and to think about that. Do we think about what we are experiencing as God's grace, or something other than God's grace that's to be avoided or solved, or whatever the case may be? Peter lumps it all together and puts it all into the category of God's grace. And so what does it mean to stand firm in this grace? What's meant by grace anyway? It's a term we throw around a lot. It's the name of our church, but what does it mean? What are its implications? How is it informing Peter here in this case, and how is he encouraging them by saying this, that everything you're experiencing is truly a part of God's grace to you? How does that help us today? How does it help you today? How does it help your family? How about for tomorrow? How can you prepare for things? Um, we'll be drawing from, I won't show the video in this video, but tomorrow we'll look at a kind of a taste ahead of what I think we're going to spend some time on in the next, perhaps right after this or very soon, rather new series that has been done by the Bible Project. And again, just because of the nature of the way we're gathering, and again, I think we just need to learn how to use these online tools. We don't need to invent them. They've been invented, but they're there that we can build on them and we can grow out of them and try to learn from them and put them to work in our own lives. So it's wonderful that we can be connected with the family of God in this way with these kinds of tools. But we'll look at the Character of God series, and tomorrow I'll focus on episode 3 and grace. You can see they're drawing on a couple of verses here in Exodus 34 and doing a word study of where God really first reveals himself in his own words in the Bible story. And we've read over that through our Bible reading really over the last month or so. And you go back and see that in Exodus 34. But God calls himself gracious. And so we're going to look at that in a video
If you tried to describe
tomorrow. That comes out of that series and study it more in depth along with other characteristics of God in that set of verses in a series to come. Commentary at this point, though, on the idea of grace might be helpful to you as well. The real point of interest in the closing verses is the one Peter highlights it here at the end of verse 12. This grace in which you stand is the true grace of God. Using the letter as an angled mirror in which to glimpse what was going on in the churches to which it was addressed, it's safe to say that the small groups of believers in ancient Turkey must have been very concerned that the persecution which was now increasing meant that they were on the wrong road. How often do we maybe think about that when things aren't going so well in our lives? That they had taken a false turning, that they had given their allegiance to Jesus as a false Messiah. Otherwise, why would these things still be happening? Isn't that a common question? Peter's solid reassurance has been based on Scripture, based on his sense of how God's purpose was always going to work out, and based above all on Jesus himself. Hold on to his death and resurrection, he says. That's the sheet anchor. He is the true Messiah, and one day he will be publicly revealed as such. This is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. And the note that we all need, especially when the going is tough, peace. Peace to you from God, peace to you in the Messiah. My other question related to the final two verses are, how are these last two verses more than incidental and provide significance for us? Often we read verses like this and we go by them. Oh, greet so-and-so, greet so-and-so, this, that. They're there in the scriptures for a reason, and they tell us something. They give us some insights into things that are more than just incidental to the story. They're actually at the foundation of it. And that's what I wanted to, that's the nature of this question. Sister churches, people mentioned by name, like in the previous verse, Silas, who may or may not be the Silas that we see accompanying Paul. Not sure. There's some question. Babylon, it's thought, very much refers to Rome, and we'll see why here in a minute. And you can go back into the Bible Project video and see why that is. That Babylon is an archetype that Peter's drawing on an Old Testament tradition that the original big bad kingdom, is Babylon, and there's been versions of it ever since. And Rome was the latest, and they would know what Peter's referring to because Rome is just the next in a whole line of Babylons that continue on in opposition to God and his purposes. And there are Babylons out there today, and for the most part, each and every system that man sets up to try to run God's world has some Babylonness in it, some more to some extent, some more than others. Greeting one another, the idea of expressions of compassion and relationship, and the well wishes of peace here. So some thoughts on this, just to sort of get you oriented and thinking about this. That one of the things you can draw, even just from these couple of verses at the end, there are relationships among the churches with Peter and other leaders like him. Silas. So this is not a letter written to us. It's a letter written for us. It was written to a number of churches in what would have been northwestern Turkey at that time, Asia Minor, mentioning specific people that all of them knew. So there's a network of churches here in mind. Leaders like Peter, like Silas, like Mark here, are also playing a vital role as connecting and communication with those churches. So their communication, the leaders are really, really key to this network of churches. And so a picture begins to emerge that we're also going to look at more carefully in the weeks to come. And this picture, again, is not incidental. It's actually intentional by God in the story that this is what it looks like. We're seeing it, those of us who are studying Acts on Thursday night. That model is put forward. What Luke is portraying there is not just a nice story of what happened to the early Christians. It's put forward to us as a model, as a catechism, as a teaching tool that says you need to also live and build and be part of something that looks like this original set of churches. And determining to what extent that applies to us is what we have to do in today's time, because there are cultural and historical differences. However, at a principle level, we need to be doing and being about the same manner of following Christ's plan. These churches are an extension of the Old Testament story, and opposition remains to God's purposes in the same light of the archetypal form of old. In other words, Babel or Babylon. So Peter's putting them on the map of what's been happening to God and his purposes and his people in the midst of that from the Old Testament times, hence the Babylon reference. John does this a lot in the book of Revelation. So he's making a reference here that pulls forward what's been part of the backstory of God's people, and which has now been brought into a new phase with the life, death, resurrection, and ascension, and future coming return of Jesus as well. Lastly, that this new family is local. These people all live in particular places, in particular regions, but it's also global. And it has to be unified around these ideas and stand firm as one in God's grace and the framework of his ultimate purposes in the Messiah, Jesus. God is building one church. God is building one family, and Peter's addressing them all here. They exist in particular places, but they're connected to a larger whole. And these letters reinforce that, not only in the message that the apostles are giving, but in the methods, the way that they're using these letters to establish all those churches and to make them both unified in substance, but also holy, set apart from the culture and the places where they are in a similar way. You can picture what these networks might have looked like. For those of you who are familiar, this is out of the Build encyclical From Jesus to the Gospels. And you have an example in the Gospel writings themselves. The Gospels, remember, were written after the churches, these churches like the one Peter's addressed, have been established. They're already started. And so the Gospels come along and reinforce that Jesus is intended for these communities to come into existence all along. It was what he was doing and bringing into being. And so Matthew addresses that, Mark addresses that, and Mark is Peter's disciple. So in Mark's gospel, we're getting Peter's understanding of what Jesus was doing in bringing about these new communities and challenging them to remain faithful, that this is what he'd intended all along. Luke does the same. John does the same. So You have the Jewish churches among the diaspora are the ones that Mark and Matthew are particularly addressing. The Gentile churches are those that the network of churches that are directly related to Paul's ministry, and Luke is his companion and co-worker. And then you have Asia Minor churches, which has some overlap with the others that John addresses. And you see that in particular the 7 churches in Revelation that we've talked about before that you're all familiar with. So these things are working. This is the scene in the first century of the networks of churches, and so these are to real people. This is a real story is unfolding here, and these letters are windows into that, and what the apostles were doing to strengthen them. A comment from that same encyclical. Sorry about the quote here. That should say from Jesus to the Gospels, not the early Christian letters. But as to Mark's network, Mark worked with Peter, which we know from church history, so there's a connection to Mark's gospel to Peter. Peter wrote his letters for the Jewish diaspora, so that's what we've been working in. Mark's gospel shares this context. These churches were mostly Jewish, or Jewish background. Peter's letters were arguing for his churches to stay with the faith, as do Hebrews and Jude. So again, the letters and the writings we have in the New Testament are there for a reason, and they're doing something. They're functioning in a certain way. They're not just a set of blessed thoughts organized randomly together. They're there for a purpose. Mark's gospel makes sense because it is a simple kerygma, declaration of the gospel, proclamation of the gospel, that reinforces that the church was Jesus' plan all along, not for the new community to be merely a remnant in Israel. Jesus is seen in Mark as leading a small community out of Israel, breaking up families. In other words, a whole new thing into a family that would spread all over the earth. The mustard seed parable. Israel is seen as rejecting Jesus and headed for destruction. So Peter has made reference to those things, and we've seen some comparisons there. And I just pointed out to the Babylon example where he's pulling that from the story of Israel back in the Old Testament and applying to these people today who are likely mostly people of Jewish background who are now followers of Jesus, but not exclusively. There are people there who were part of the Gentile world and the pagan world, and now this is their story. And they need to adopt it and be shaped by it as well, and it has influence in them. So summarizing today, what we're looking at here, our lives in Jesus and the forgiveness and transformation he has brought to us to share together in following him is a gift and sign of his very character and favor. The lives we have together, the situations that he allows and in which we find ourselves, as challenging as they are rooted in the same grace. So the good and the challenging, we have to think in the same light. They're all part of God's grace for us in this time. And we live and serve him in this world unmoved by that reality until he comes. It is what always makes us whole and complete. In every circumstance, this is grace we stand in, whether it's things that we're, really, really happy and thankful for, or those things that we're really, really challenged by. It's all part of God's grace. His grace, from beginning to end is what's going on. And that grace is embodied in and centralized in Jesus himself. And Peter has pointed back to Jesus time and time again. So as we come together tomorrow, what question, insight, testimony, song, or other contribution from this teaching will you bring to the gathering this weekend? What do you bring to share with others? Ask the Lord for help in that. Be intent on doing that. We need to be. We learn together as a community. So that's what I encourage you to do as we come together tomorrow. Sorry for the fine writing here, but I'll read it out. I thought this was a very helpful quote from one of the scholars that I was studying, Scott McKnight, in his commentary here. He says, therefore, as we come to the end of a marvelous letter, we too are confronted with the same call to responsible living in our world. We're called to live honorably in our society so that there are no grounds of accusations against us, and we can make the biggest possible impact on our world. We're called to live a holy life, abstaining from sin. We're called to live a loving life, serving our brothers and sisters in the Christian family. We're called to live in light of God's judgment, making sure that everything we do will be approved by God in that final hour. Our identity is not to be wrapped up in our social location, whether that be low, like Peter's churches, or high, like many churches today. or even in our nationalities or political orientations, for that matter, but in the fact that we are God's family and are related to Him. As such, we are to serve one another with the gifts God has granted and live orderly and lovingly with one another. No matter how many adjustments we have to make as we read Peter's letter in our world, we are anchored to his world by the fact that of the common salvation that transforms our behavior. We are challenged to learn circumspectly in our society, and we are expected to live as the family of God ought to live. When we live like this, people will glorify him on the day he visits us. So he's trying to wrap up some of the things that we've gone over in these weeks looking at First Peter. So some questions that we can focus on tomorrow that I leave with you are these. What is grace, simply put? And I've referred to that in this teaching. How would you describe grace? How would you accurately describe it to someone? Do you got an example? Obviously, Jesus, what he's done for us is an example. But what other things? What are things specific to your own lives? When have you seen God's grace operational in your life that you'd point to that, especially when it was not something that you were really expecting or might appreciate, but you now look at it and say, oh, that was God's grace. What changes about your perspective as a follower of Jesus when everything is put under the purpose of God's grace in our life? How does this change your view of everything in life and ministry together? What difference would it make if we were better connected and networked like those early churches were? That's some of that stuff in the last couple of verses. Why do you think God intended for that for us today as well? Why do you think God intended that for us as well today? Should we be connected that way? Should we be vitally part of a network like that? Or is that just for then and we're doing what we are free to do today? Those are important questions, practical ones that maybe you don't think of when you read verses like that at the end of these letters. So that finishes the video for today. Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, and we'll get this out to you soon. Pray that you have a great rest of Saturday, and look forward to our time tomorrow again, all together in person and on Zoom at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on Sunday. Have a great day. God bless you guys and your families there.